I think they're biking, so they're going to be going on soon, and Denise will join us a little bit later. But we need to go ahead and get started with Daniel chapter 10. As we get to Daniel 10 through 12, the story is actually all connected. To me, it's, well, for some people, it can be rather boring as you get into chapter 11, because you've got to follow King of the South, King of the North, who controls the Holy Land, back and forth. But some of us just love history, which I do, and so it's always a fascinating study. But what amazes me is, as this chapter will open up, we're looking at around 536-ish, that general area, BC, 536 years before Christ. Daniel is given a prophecy to write down from the angel Gabriel, and he is covering a lot of details from the 300s, 200s, 100s BC, and step by step by step by step, it is documented in history that is exactly what took place. So we have our church has a booklet titled, "Is the Bible True?" One of the chapters is, I believe it's titled God and Prophecy. And it basically goes through, in fact, that was the one handout that I sent to you that I wanted to work off of as we get to chapter 11. But let's first of all focus on chapter 10. As it says in verse 1, the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Now this brings up once again the question, was this Cyrus? Was this the governor Gubaru that he had? But at any rate, we have Cyrus at the end of chapter 5. He's coming on the scene, and his dates in history are fairly well known. And in 539 BC, in the fall, we had the fall of Babylon. And so here we are, his third year. So we're looking, 536 is pretty close. And then it mentions his name, Belteshazzar, which was the Babylonian name that he was given. Okay. Verse 1, sorry, my tablet, I guess I touched it and it went forward several verses. So the message was true, but the appointed time was long, and he understood the message and had understanding of the vision. But notice here in verse 2, in those days, I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. So that is a long time. But Daniel, you see, this is far enough along to where that Cyrus, remember from the early verses of Ezra chapter 1, Cyrus gave a decree that the Jews who had been captive in Babylon for 70 years are now to be sent back to their home in Judea and to Jerusalem. He gave them a lot of assistance. He gave them the authorization to go and rebuild and restore. And so Daniel, remember, most of his life, and by this time he's got to be 80-ish, maybe early 80s, he has spent 70 years in Babylon. And he is probably overwhelmed, wanting to know, did the Jews get back? Are they rebuilding? And all of that. So, verse 3, I ate no pleasant food, no meat or wine came into my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all, till 3 whole weeks were fulfilled. Now, it doesn't read like it was a full, complete fast. No food, no water. It just says certain things he didn't eat, maybe just the basics to sustain life, but 3 weeks. And verse 4, on the 24th day of the first month. All right, first month, though, think in terms of the annual Jewish festivals. If he is on, this is the month Abib or Nisan, if it's a 24th day, then this period of time covered the whole period where you had the Passover, the days of unleavened bread, and so on. I was by the side of the great river, that is the Tigris. Again, remember Mesopotamia. Babylon was on the Euphrates, but not far away is the Tigris. Coming from upstream is where ancient Nineveh was located. I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose waist was girded with gold of Uphaz. His body like beryl, face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like torches of fire, his arms and feet like burnished bronze in color. The sound of his words were like the voice of a multitude. So when you first glance at this, we really, this individual, this being is not identified for us. Some have looked at it, and they look in Revelation 1, verses 13 to 16, with the description of the glorified Christ that John was inspired to write. There are a lot of similarities here, but really it could have applied to any angelic being. We have had the angel Gabriel sent, and we're going to see Gabriel here yet a little further, and then at the end of this chapter, Michael the archangel will be mentioned as well. Verse 7, I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great terror fell upon them, so that they fled to hide themselves. So we have other places in the Bible. You may remember where Saul of Tarsus, the one who became the Apostle Paul, was on the road to Damascus. He was struck with blindness, the blinding light, but there were things he heard those with him didn't fully experience. So it had to be very attention-getting, to say the least. So he was left alone. He heard the words. Let's drop on down. Verse 10, and the subheading in the New King James is that we have prophecies concerning Persia and Greece. Remember, chapter 8 had the ram and the he-goat, and it pictured the Medo-Persian Empire, the two horns, the one taller than the other, and then the he-goat that represented the ram, Greece, that came along and ran with great force into the first one. So that was Persia, and then was Greece. So a hand touched him, and he was strengthened. Verse 11, he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly beloved. Now that's the very same phrase that Gabriel used the previous chapter, chapter 9, verse 21, where he said, no, that's not the right verse. Anyhow, let's keep moving. There was an earlier place where Gabriel used the same term, man greatly beloved. He stood trembling. Verse 12, do not fear. Then notice, from the first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before God. So pause there. 21 days earlier, this angel is now speaking to Daniel 21 days earlier, but notice what he says. Your words were heard, and I have come because of your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. And behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left there alone with the kings of Persia. Now, let's pause right there. What we have is a little insight into another dimension. There is a spirit world, and there are righteous angels, the holy angels of God that are here as the servants of the heirs of salvation. And then there is what appears to be the 1/3 who followed Lucifer in his rebellion and became the devil and the demonic hordes. And there is a great deal that takes place behind the scenes in the world around us that we don't see with our eyes. We have many places in the scripture The story of King Saul. There were times when Saul would be down, discouraged. It was like he went into a deep depression, and there was a demon, an evil spirit that was there messing with his mood as the king of Israel. And then David, the young David, would come and play a godly type of a music, and the whole setting would change, and the demon would leave. We've had in history, we've had, I think I mentioned last time, having read many years ago a biography of Hitler, Der Fuhrer, and the author wrote of a time. He wrote of a time when meeting of the German High Command. Hitler would oftentimes be there, and he was a very kind of a introverted, withdrawn individual. Then, all of a sudden, something would change, and they could see it in his eyes. Something would change, and he would become this human dynamo. And in looking back the record of history, the only conclusion I can come to is that a demon had an open door, a very powerful demon would come and take charge, and there is so much that takes place. There have been those who have written about the various powers in the Middle East, and the old wisdom of the Middle East is that there is a demonic world, and they are continually tampering with the events on this earth. So we're getting a little glimpse of that here. There was 3 weeks, it appears, of spiritual battle. We aren't given the particulars on what happened, where, but apparently the angel from God was sent to Daniel to give this prophecy, but he was held up. You may remember Paul said, that he intended to go somewhere, but he would say, but Satan hindered us. He doesn't go into the details, but it happens, surely it happens all the time. So 3 weeks. Now, verse 14. I have come to make you understand what will happen to your people. Well, he was with the captives of Judea. So of your people, Judah was one of the tribes of the overall house of Israel, the combined kingdom back in those days. For the vision refers to many days yet to come. When he had spoken such words to me, I turned my face toward the ground, became speechless. So one came, touched his lips, another came, strengthened him, and let's go on down to verse 18. Then again, one having the likeness of a man touched me and strengthened me. And he said, "O man, greatly beloved." So Daniel is called that by that phrase once again. "Fear not, peace be to you, be strong, yes, be strong." When he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, "Let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me." Then he said, "Do you know why I have come to you? And now I must return to fight with the prince of Persia, and when I have gone, indeed, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is noted in the scripture of truth. No one upholds me against these except Michael, your prince." So there's Michael mentioned once again. So spiritual warfare was going on behind the scenes, and we have this angel needed help to break through, to come to give to him the prophecy that we're going to start reading in chapter 11. Michael the archangel was sent, and of course in Revelation 12 it mentions a time where there'll be war in heaven. Michael and his angels will fight against the devil and his forces. But let's go on to chapter 11. Well, I've got in my old Bible here, I've got a number of verses. Let me just mention these to you as you may want to sketch them down. John 12, verse 31. John 12:31, Jesus referred to the prince of the world, that his time was about up. Of course, we're probably very familiar with 2 Corinthians 4, verse 4, the God of this age, the spirit that works, and the sons of disobedience. Then Ephesians 2, verse 2. Ephesians 2, verse 2. Very, very important verse there. The prince of the power of the air. And Satan broadcasts these attitudes. Then we have Ephesians 6, verse 12. Ephesians 6:12. And that one has to do about that was just before it said, put on the whole armor of God. But it talked about how we don't wrestle with flesh and blood. Our struggle is with spiritual wickedness or wicked spirits in higher heavenly places. And a lot of times we look at whether it's world events or we look at just frustrations of life that we have, and we may look across and we see the face of a human being and focus all of the blame on that human being, when maybe they're just being used as a pawn by the spiritual forces that are actually trying to discourage us and to trip us up. So chapter 11, and we've got this handout at the top. It says as excerpts, or it is an excerpt from the book that is the Bible Truth. And it does mention what a phenomenal prophecy this is, because it's going to start right there at that time. And he's going to talk about the Medes, or rather the Medo-Persian Empire, the Persians, how many more kings. He's going to quickly go to Greece. And then we're going to essentially have the Grecian Empire broken into 4 pieces. 2 are going to disappear in short order, and you'll have these 2 power bases, King of the North, King of the South. I mentioned last time, but again, let me reiterate, chapter 11, one of the best things that I can tell you is keep asking the question, who controls the Holy Land? Who controls the Holy Land? Because the rest of it doesn't matter. King of the North up in Syria, King of the South down in Egypt. But even later on, you see, those up in Syria were taken over by Rome, and the power base moved over there. It was in Egypt, but let us not assume that it may not move somewhere else. It may include Egypt at the time of the end. But anyhow, we have a fascinating chapter here. Third year of, Daniel 10:1 says it's the 3rd year of Cyrus. This one says 1st year of Darius the Mede. Again, this Darius generally is thought that he is this governor Gabaru, who was over that whole region around Babylon. So I stood up to confirm, strengthen him. Now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he will stir up all against the realm of Greece. So here again, like in chapters 7 and 8, it lists them by name. Medo-Persia will be followed by Greece. So with your handout, if we use this as kind of our springboard, and I realize some people just thrive on the history side of it, and others want to keep moving fast. So we're going to touch on parts of it here and there. In verse 2, it mentioned 3 kings. Now I have on my tablet, I have, beside the scriptures, I have the old Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown commentary. And it's interesting, they're just right on. Expositor's Bible Dictionary just has a phenomenal section on this. So it's greatly understood. And so you have the three kings, as the handout mentions. Cambyses was the oldest son of Cyrus. So from father to oldest son. But he also had a younger son whose name was Smerdis. But you'll see here it mentions a pseudo. That's a fake, a false, a counterfeit Smerdis. The younger son had been secretly killed, and then this man, known in history as Pseudo Smerdis, fostered himself off as being the true heir. So he reigned, but it was only a short time. Then mentions Darius the Persian. There was in history a Darius, and I'm probably not saying the name right, but Hystapes, something like Hystapses, Darius Hystapes. He was the third king, but it said what? The fourth will be far richer. The one after him was Xerxes. Xerxes is the one that we find in the book of Esther. Okay, remember his wife Vashti would not come appear before him, and so then have a contest to find out who's going to be the next queen. And that's where Esther came along. It's interesting to think Esther was very young. And for instance, the one after Xerxes was his son Artaxerxes, who's mentioned in Ezra. Very likely the queen mother, not mother, but the queen stepmother, I should say, Esther, was still around where so much of that, when so much of that, say in the book of Ezra, was taking place. Xerxes actually gathered up, it talks here, he'll stir up all against the realm of Greece. It's even reported he gathered together 1 million in his military, 1 million, went against Greece thinking they're going to strike this knockout blow, and it didn't happen. It didn't happen. So, verse 3, then a mighty king shall arise. Now, let me also warn you, quite often, Daniel 11 is going to have these time gaps, these time lapses. We're going to skip over a lot of years, in fact, sometimes centuries, as we get further into the prophecy. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. Now this brings us to the Grecian Empire. The great leader there was Alexander the Great. I think I mentioned last time Alexander had a brother. He had, well, some say one son, some say two sons, but his son or sons and his brother were all murdered after his death. In a short period of time, there is no heir to the throne as far as passing from father to son or closest relative. And so, let's see, let me try to, I hope you can see that. Here is, I believe I showed this to you last week, but we have when Alexander came along, he started here in the Macedonian, the Grecian area, and he took off conquering major battle Issus against the Medo-Persians, all the way down into Egypt, back up. Second battle, Arbela, kind of the knockout blow for the remnants of the Medo-Persian Empire. But he kept on going. That's all he did. Oh yes, pardon me. I had a question from the family. So all the way over, basically almost against India and back. Now, this map shows you Alexander died, I mentioned, no male heir from the family. Essentially the military. You had the four generals. You had Cassander up here in Greece, Macedonia, Lysimachus, Thrace, and much of Asia Minor, Seleucus, this whole area from the Mediterranean all the way across Mesopotamia, beyond the Persian Gulf, some distance. And then you had Ptolemy down the south. Now, let me see if I can, no, I can't move that up, but Seleucus took over the area of Lysimachus. He also took over the part of Cassander. So within something like 20 to 30 years, you only have the two power bases. You have the Greek Empire, or what's left of it. Up here out of Antioch, you have the Seleucus family. And then you have the Ptolemies in Egypt. Now let me go on to one more. The second handout that I sent to you, the one that was a PDF file, the last page, it has this map. This too shows you had the one reigning here, the one here in Asia Minor, and then all this area, Seleucid family from Antioch. That was the headquarters for a long time. And then you have the Ptolemies down here from Alexandria, Egypt, including the Holy Land. Okay, let me stop sharing that and go back. All right, so four winds of heaven. Let's go on to verse 5. The king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes. So again, just keep in mind for a long time, just two power bases, the Ptolemies down in Egypt, the Seleucid, or a lot of the men are called Antiochus, up in Syria, out of Antioch. Okay, verse 5 becomes strong, one of his princes shall gain power over him, have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. So you have in your handout here, after Alexander's death, this is verse 5, king of the south was Ptolemy the first. The biblical expression, one of his princes, refers to Seleucus. So you have these two who are at odds now, king of the north, king of the south. But Seleucus used to be a general for Ptolemy. Actually, as we go on, we're going to find there was a marriage, and you actually have, they're all related after a while. Sounds like when you have European wars and the kingly, queenly lines of Europe, so many of them are of the same families. Okay, so verse 6, at the end of some years they shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of her authority, neither he nor his authority shall stand up. Okay, that's, you know, a lot of this can get really muddled and confusing if we try to just wade through all of it. The handout has here with verse 6, the Laodicean War, and you have the story that is right here. So I don't think that I should try to cover all of this just word for word, but you have this daughter, Berenice, daughter of Ptolemy II, who goes to marry Antiochus II up in the king of the north. The father in the south thinks the daughter will help me get a foot in the door to control things up north. Turns out the daughter cooperates with her husband instead of helping the father. So she, it says here, she okay, so Antiochus divorced her. She manipulated a conspiracy for her place of banishment. Okay, Berenice and infant son are assassinated. Okay. I guess just to summarize it, marriage between Antiochus II of Syria, and Berenice, daughter of Ptolemy II, down in Egypt. And then Berenice, an infant son, killed. Antiochus II was poisoned. He died shortly thereafter. And so verses 7 through 9, you have the retaliation that it covers there, a number of military actions. You have Ptolemy II dying down in Egypt, so the next Ptolemy is his son, Ptolemy III, but he's the brother of this Berenice who was killed. So you've just got bad blood back and forth that takes place. Verse 8, he'll carry their gods captive to Egypt, so he made an attack up to the north, actually captured Antioch, the capital. And let's see, took a lot of the long lost idols and treasures, sacred treasures of Egypt back home. Yeah, we get in all this Seleucus II, III, IV, Antiochus III, and we're going to get lost. Let me go now to back to this is my old King James that I'll be looking at. I think for the most part, we're just going to have to leave it for you to use the handout to go through, because there's so much material here. But I think what I'd like to do is to drop on down to verse 20 and pick it up there. Verse 20 is where we're introduced to the one we know in history as Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus IV. He is the one. Now, by this time, we are a long way down the line. Daniel was given the prophecy in the 530s BC. We're down in the 160s BC. So we've skipped over a lot of ground between some of the verses up to this point. We have this section, chapter 11, verses 21 through 35, and you have a lot of it that focuses on this Antiochus Epiphanes. And there was something that happened during his time, and Jesus, in Matthew 24, the Olivet prophecy, he referred back to something, the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. And that's an event that is referred to here in this prophecy. So in verse 21, again, we've skipped a lot of time. We're down to the Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV. In his estate shall stand up a vile person. And if you read about his life, he was a vile pervert. He was just a disgusting person. And what he did was thoroughly disgusting. To whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. The handout goes into some of the things that were mentioned that took place at this time. Verse 22, with arms of a flood, they shall be overflown from before him, and shall be broken. Yes, also the prince of the covenant. Now, don't go down the wrong road on this. Prince of the covenant is not referring to Christ here. This is Antiochus Epiphanes IV. He actually had the Jewish high priest murdered and replaced by another man named Jason, who was not of a priestly line. Let's see. Verse 24, he shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province. He shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey, the spoil, the riches. He shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. So we have deceit taking place between Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, and dealing with Rome, dealing with the Holy Land, dealing with the Ptolemies down in Egypt. We have a series of campaigns fought between Syria and Egypt during that time. We have Egypt being weakened. Syria during this period of time has the upper hand. They have more strength. A lot of this, there's bribery. There is a lot of propaganda that is behind the scenes here. In verse 26, yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. This is looking at a betrayal. The Ptolemy leader, Ptolemy V, is betrayed, taken prisoner. It's all done under the guise of friendship because actually, as I mentioned, these people are related. Antiochus Epiphanes was the uncle of Ptolemy V, who was reigning down south. So, verse 27, and both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief. They shall speak lies at one table. So, many references are made to a banquet that took place, and they were both dealing deceitfully with the other, trying to deceive the other. But it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Verse 28, then shall he return into his land with great riches. Antiochus Epiphanes returns back, comes through the Holy Land, takes off a lot of the riches. His heart shall be against the Holy Covenant. That's referring to the Jews, the covenant people with God who were there around Jerusalem. And he shall do exploits and return to his own land. Verse 29, at the time appointed, he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. So Antiochus moves toward Egypt. Actually, we begin to find Rome gets involved. Rome starts making demands. Rome is a rising power. They will become more dominant, and of course, this remnant of the Grecian Empire is going to fall to Rome in short time. Antiochus IV got a report that the Jews rejoiced because they heard that he had died. And so he had his forces go through, and horrible things were done to the Jews at that time. Again, Rome gets involved. Verse 30, the ships of Kittim. Let's see how that reads. The ships from Cyprus, the New King James says. This is a Roman fleet moved from Cyprus against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation. So Rome steps in. He is stopped. He doesn't push his luck any further. And so he is angry, and he turns and have indignation against the Holy Covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsook the Holy Covenant. So here we have a continued attempt by this man to try to stamp out what was the true religion at that time. The Jews were the remnant. They had the sacrificial system going, but he moved in. He stopped the sacrifices. You remember in chapter 8, we saw a 2,300 2,300 evening and morning sacrifices were going to be stopped. So for about 3 years, we have a period of time where the sacrificing was stopped. Antiochus had his soldiers go into Jerusalem. They desecrated the temple area. They extinguished the temple lights that were to burn forever, continually. They sacrificed a pig, spewed pig's blood around even the Holy of Holies. They cooked the pig and took the pig broth and spewed it everywhere. So this was an abomination that makes desolate. Again, Jesus referred back, when you see the abomination that makes desolate, spoken by Daniel the prophet, you know the time is near. So this was 168, the year 168, 167 BC. A lot of these things came to a head. There was about a 3-year period of time, no sacrifices. You are familiar with the apocryphal books. A Catholic Bible has a lot of extra books. A lot of these we do not look at as being, they did not make the canon of the Bible. I will mention 1st and 2nd Maccabees. So like we have 1st and 2nd Corinthians, there's 1st Maccabees, 2nd Maccabees. These are basically good books of history, and they give a lot of background. Again, it's not Holy Scripture, but it gives a lot of background as far as all that happened. There was in fact, I think the handout, verses 32 to 35, it mentions this family of priests, the Maccabees. And then first you had this Mattathias, leading priest, but then one of his sons, Judas Maccabee. Handout says he was nicknamed the Hammer. Sounds like an interesting nickname to have earned. But he and others lead the forces of the Jews, where they go in, they retake possession of the city, the temple, they cleanse the temple, rekindle the temple lights in the month of December. By our calendar today, there is the Jewish celebration called Hanukkah. It's mentioned in let's see, I think it's John 10:22, the Feast of Dedication. It is also called the Feast of Lights. So Hanukkah, Feast of Dedication, or Feast of Lights. And that is a Jewish national day of thanksgiving based upon what the Maccabean priests did as they led a revolt, took back over control, cleansed the temple, restarted the sacrifices. And so they proclaimed this. It's kind of like our country, most countries will have a national day of Thanksgiving. And so we have Thanksgiving. It means a lot to us in America. It means nothing to someone in Spain. But this is a Jewish holiday. It's not an annual Sabbath day that God asks us to keep. So it mentions here the Maccabees. You can go to 1st and 2nd Maccabees if you want. It's been a long time since I read it, but it's a fascinating story of all that they did and how that they won against greatly superior forces. Under the handout here, verses 32 to 35, 3rd paragraph, it says, at this point, Daniel's prophecy takes on a different tone, shifting to the time of the end, near the end of verse 35. So as let's see, I did not read verse 31. Let's look at verse 31. An arm shall stand on his part. They shall pollute the sanctuary of strength and shall take away the daily sacrifice. I refer to that in passing. They shall place the abomination that makes desolate. And we talked about that. Verse 32, and such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. But now notice from the middle of verse 32, but the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. Now, we're going to start skipping over a lot of time, but really it's progressive. From that time, the Maccabean priests, following Judas and the others, all the way forward. You're going to have some who are in a covenant with God. They're going to stand up and they will do great exploits. We could extend that across through the rest of time down to when Christ was here, through the time of Christ's ministry, the early church, the stories we have in the book of Acts. We have stories that history has retained a bit here, a bit there. Even you get into the 100s AD, you had Polycarp, who was trained by the Apostle John, contending with the Bishop of Rome over the question of Passover versus Easter. And then the next one to follow him, Polycrates, still was having the same. The history calls it the Quarto Deciman. Quarto is 4, deciman refers to series of tens. So the question of the 14th. And across the ages, there were times when people were persecuted. People gave their lives to preserve the Bible or to translate the Bible into the vernacular, the common language. Remember stories like of John Wycliffe, or over in Prague, Czech Republic, Jan Hus, the revolt that took place there, because there were peoples who wanted to have access to the Holy Scriptures. And a lot of lives have been lost so that we can have what we hold here in front of us today. But verse 33, they that understand among the people shall instruct many. Yet they shall fall by the sword, and by flame, by captivity, and by spoil many days. Now when they shall fall, they shall be helped with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. Verse 35, this is where it mentions different tone. We're going to the time of the end. Verse 35, some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them and to purge, to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is for a time appointed. So we could say we're here in the 160s. We can skip to the time of Christ, the first century, the early church, the exploits of the apostles, the apostolic church. Across the ages, many have been tried in the fire and have been given, have qualified for being clothed in white with the resurrection. The time of the end. Now, verse 36. Let me turn a page here. Okay, I think that's about as far as our handout went. But we got a late start, but let me go just a little bit further. And we have lots of things we can talk about as we get down. Maybe we'll pick it up next time with verse 40-ish. But in verse 36, and the king. Now, up above, it was talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. He was from Syria. He was the king of the north. Now, as we get to 65 BC, Rome has risen to the point where they take over all that had been under the control of Syria. In one sense, we can say the power base that was in Syria under the Seleucid family has now been shifted over into Italy to Rome. That's where it's controlled. That is the next world ruling empire to come on the scene. For instance, Daniel 2 and 7 and 8, they all talked about this fourth kingdom, this dreadful and terrible one. So, this king, this is the king of the north, shall do according to his will. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. Now let's pause right there. A part of something that came along with Rome is that the emperors demanded worship of themselves as if they were a god. they taught that they were divine. Magnify himself above every god, shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. And that very well may refer to Christ's return, with the advent of Christ. All right, verse 37, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers. Again, I'm reading the Old King James, gods of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. When we get to Rome, more so we have this concept of an alliance of church and state. We have an emperor and we have a religious leader, and they're allied together. Sometimes it was a love-hate relationship. You look across the ages, and once in a while, the emperor of Rome would banish the Pope out to Ravenna or up to Avignon, and the Pope would turn around and excommunicate the emperor. But when push came to shove, they were together as a part of the same empire, same system. Not regarding the desire of women. Again, a little fuzzy the way it's worded here, but the desire of woman refers to the false Messiah, Tammuz. And again, various emperors rejected the rule of this false Christ. Again, the love-hate relationship between the state, the church, and the state. Verse 38, but in his estate he shall honor the God of forces, or proper translation, the God of fortresses. Goddess of fortress. The goddess of fortresses from back in the ancient days of Egypt was Semiramis. She was a type of the false religion. And let's see, a God of his fathers knew not, shall he honor with gold or silver, with precious things and stones and pleasant things. Now, let me just give you a reference here. 2 Thessalonians 2. I don't have the verses here, but it's right around verse 3 and 4. 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 3 and 4, talks about this son of perdition, this person who sets himself up and seeks worship as though he were God. And so that's, Paul's writing that's a prophecy for the end time. Verse 39, thus shall he do in the most strongholds with the strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. He shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. Very obscure in the King James, but refers to times when the state, the Roman Empire, gained victory when they were allied with the false prophet. And there were those who acknowledged him, gave him the adulation he sought, and he increased with honor and rewarded them. Okay, now, just not having my computer giving me any feedback has been frustrating. You probably have noticed I've been just a little bit frustrated because of the technical difficulty here. We skipped over a lot of areas. I think, again, this handout and then the other one that Tom Robinson wrote. Tom has written the lion's share of the Bible commentary over the years that the church has posted online. Tom gives a lot of great information. With his on page I don't know if you can see that, but with his on page, I think it's page 10, second to the last page, he has a chart with all of these Daniel 11 rulers. It will help you follow back and forth, you know, Seleucus 1 and Ptolemy 1 and back and forth, and follow it through, down through the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. So anyhow, I think that we will wrap it up there. Next time we want to start with verse 40. This is when it gets down to the 20th century, we believe. 20th century, King of the South pushing at King of the North, a forerunner of things we're going to see yet ahead. We see some things that are happening now. Back in the 1970s, when the OPEC, the oil producing and exporting countries, started turning off the oil spigot, all we could see was oil politics. But a lot of things have happened since then. There's still oil, but there's a specter of terrorism, and maybe other things. But we'll pick it up with verse 40 next week, and we'll get through chapter 11 and then chapter 12.